Good evening, Tansei Aneen. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Grief, shock, and anger is rippling across Indigenous communities in Manitoba as the body of another Indigenous woman is found in a Winnipeg landfill. Indigenous leaders are demanding change, and community activists are trying to support people who are struggling. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
It angers me.
Cambria Harris says the discovery of 33-year-old Linda Mary Beardy's body in the Brady landfill this week is heartbreaking. Beardy was a mother of 4 young children and had not been reported missing, according to Winnipeg police. They believe her body had only been in the landfill for a short time before workers discovered her.
And when something like this happens to our community, it brings up old scars and old traumas, and that's what happens over and over again, and nothing changes.
Manitoba Keewaydinowi Okimakanak Grand Chief Garrison Settee echoed this in an emailed statement. Sometimes there really are no words, and that's just it, they're words. How many times do we have to go through this before we see real change? Other organizations, from the Native Women's Association of Canada to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, shared their sadness and frustration at the news of another Indigenous woman being found in a landfill.
I feel for them as a grandmother, as a mother, and her leaving her children, and it's such a painful experience for the families and for the nation.
The Southern Chiefs organization set up a gathering space in Winnipeg's North End last night, lighting a sacred fire for the victim.
You know, community is everything, and we just really need to uphold our relations and be close and ensure that our community's okay. Like, this is just another trauma after another trauma, and it doesn't get easier, so we just really need to come together.
Knowledge keeper Louis Young spoke of the need for healing.
We have that power within ourselves. So this dark period of time, as painful as it is, we've got to realize that we have the power to recover.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A Justice for Linda Beardy rally and march will be held on Friday here in Winnipeg. And for the second time this week, a house fire on a First Nation has turned fatal. RCMP say early Tuesday morning they responded to a house fire on the Bloodvein First Nation about 300 kilometers north of Winnipeg. A 49-year-old man was found dead in the home. It has been a particularly devastating year for fires on First Nations in Manitoba. In February, an apartment fire on the Tatasquayak Cree Nation left 2 injured and 9 families displaced. 2 weeks ago, an 11-year-old boy died in a house fire on the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation. And earlier this week, a 25-year-old woman died in another house fire in Tatasquayak Cree Nation. Our condolences go out to the families and those affected. Chiefs from across the country have been in the nation's capital all week. It's day 3 of the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs meeting. And as Annette Francis reports, a lot of today's discussion centered on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
On Wednesday morning, Justice Minister David Lametti gave a brief overview to the chiefs on Canada's United Nations Declaration Draft Action Plan. According to Lametti, the final document is intended to be co-developed with Indigenous people.
The action plan is a draft. It is meant to be the focal point for intense discussion over the next 3 months. There's a lot missing in there. There's a lot that needs to be improved. There are a lot of suggestions that have been made recently by various First Nations groups that have yet to be incorporated in, and there's still a lot of dialogue that will continue focusing on the strengths and weaknesses of that draft.
Lametti said the action plan will lay out a roadmap on how Canada's laws must align with the principles in UNDRIP. For much of the morning, the chiefs drilled the minister. However, Chief John Martin of the Quebec First Nation had concerns over a provincial law, Quebec's Language Act.
And this law has had an impact on our languages. Our language is in peril at this moment. Our students, since the French language law was implemented around 40 years ago, has had a severe impact on our students accessing post-secondary education in Quebec.
Lametti said he's watching the situation in Quebec carefully.
We also know we have a responsibility. Bill C-91 was part of it, to protect and promote Indigenous languages, and will continue, I hope. And I think the declaration will give impetus to that moving forward in that regard.
Chief Derek Nepenak says UNDRIP was an aspirational document that will take time to fully develop.
The implementation action plan has to include, I think, in my opinion, a constitutional conference that includes the First Ministers, where real decisions can be made towards what could be a watershed moment in the future relations between Indigenous people in Canada.
Grand Chief Joel Abram of the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians agrees.
We're a pretty big palette of colors in the AFN in terms of cultural, language, treaty rights, everything. And so you're not going to get a one-size-fits-all solution. And so, hopefully Canada's prepared to move forward on that basis, that some are going to move forward faster than others are.
The federal government has until mid-June to table the action plan. On Thursday, the chiefs will continue to go over the plan and their next steps. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A group of Indigenous leaders took to Parliament Wednesday to express their support of the Coastal GasLink LNG pipeline in British Columbia. They seek to change the narrative of Indigenous opposition ahead of the G7 summit next month. As opposition to BC pipelines grows, some in the region want the project. Crystal Smith is the chief counselor of the Haisla Nation and chairperson for the First Nations LNG Alliance. She is also a board member of Cedar LNG, which is owned by the nation. She says projects in her territory are sustainable and responsible and secure traditional territories for future generations.
We have spent years working with our community members, elders, neighboring nations and communities and industry partners to develop a project that both minimizes the impact to the local environment and has the lowest GHG intensity of any LNG in the world. No one cares more about our territory than we do.
All right, we have to step aside a moment. We still have plenty of news to come. Stay with us. Welcome back to APTN National News. In Nova Scotia, negotiations are underway between the Migma and the Nova Scotia and Canadian governments for a long-term forestry agreement. It comes on the heels of the conclusion of a pilot project where Nova Scotia granted 30,000 hectares of Crown Forest for the Migma to make use of. The Migma Forestry Initiative brings traditional Migma knowledge to the timber industry and provides economic opportunities to Migma communities. So far, the initiative includes land parcels in 8 counties across the province. Confederacy of Mainland Migma Executive Director Angie Gillis believes it's an opportunity to eventually return lands to the Migma.
I think, again, we are just at the beginning stages of this. And we can now talk about it. So if we can now talk about it more, people can become involved, and we can look at how we can kind of expand those lands for us to be part of and manage and do it in a way that's responsible.
First Nation and Métis groups in Saskatchewan are now threatening legal action after the provincial government passed the Saskatchewan First Act a few weeks ago. The act allows the province to explore natural resources without being bound to constitutional oversight by the federal government. A press release from the province mentions discussions with Indigenous communities, but the Federation of Indigenous Sovereign Nations, as well as the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, say no consultation was done. FSIN Vice Chief Heather Baer says the act infringes on First Nations treaty rights.
With no mention of First Nations, well, of course, our leadership is concerned here because not only in terms of resource development, but in matters of protection. Whenever there is development, there are always impacts.
For most people, going to see a doctor when you're sick is a no-brainer. But for Indigenous, transgender, and two-spirit folks, it's not always an easy choice. Sab Jones tells us how a lack of knowledge is keeping some people out of the doctor's office.
A Métis mom is on the hunt for a new doctor after a Winnipeg physician refused to treat her transgender son.
He right off just told them like, oh, I can't do that, I won't be able to do that, etc.
We aren't identifying the mother for privacy reasons. Her son began hormone replacement therapy at 16 under the care of his pediatrician. Now an adult, he needs a general practitioner to refill his prescriptions and monitor hormone levels.
I've spoken to nurses, nurse practitioners, doctors, patients. Everyone has told me that it's simple hormone management. And all doctors do that for cis people all the time.
He was referred to a doctor who claimed to not be educated on trans health needs.
From what I've learned from the people I've talked to is there is no special training needed. I had one patient tell me that their doctor was completely uneducated and knew nothing about transgender health care. When the clinic with the K faxed their information over, they reviewed it for 5 minutes and have been taking care of them ever since. Mm-hmm. That's all it takes. If you have managed to become a doctor, then you can manage taking care of trans people. There's no reason to be turning people away like this.
Accessing medical care as a transgender person in Winnipeg comes with great difficulty, despite efforts by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba. They recently published a guide to teach doctors how to care for trans patients. It states they expect all registrants provide respectful care to all patients regarding their sexuality and gender. Gil Pruden has struggled to receive affirming medical care in the city since coming out in the 1980s.
I was just treated so terrible in the hospital. It was awful. That's why today I kind of hesitate. I'd rather suffer at home. And I'm sure a lot of people do the same thing because of that treatment.
Back then, her group of two-spirit friends took care of each other to avoid facing discrimination.
We didn't have health care. We had nobody to turn to. We just took care of ourselves. Coming from reservations, we're taught how to self-heal and what to use to heal. So back then we didn't care. We tried everything that we could remember off the reserve, how to treat one another.
But she couldn't avoid the hospital forever. 10 years ago, Pruden had double pneumonia and was in a coma with a breathing tube. She says the doctors talked freely, thinking she couldn't hear them.
And they were always referring to me as he, him, sir. And I wasn't used to that. I was really hurt. I was bothered, and I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't even talk. But I could hear that.
Pruden says her hygiene was neglected and she was ignored when requesting pain control.
I wanted to stop breathing. I just wanted to end my life. I couldn't take it. It was so awful to be referred to that way when I wasn't used to it. And I never felt like I was male. And I don't know why they were giving me such a hard time.
In a 2021 report by Trans Pulse Canada on Indigenous trans healthcare in the country, they found nearly 1 in 5 individuals don't have a primary healthcare provider, and just over half have unmet healthcare needs. Until trans people don't need to worry about discrimination at the doctors, this proud mom has one request.
If your child's on the rainbow spectrum and you do get sent to a general practitioner, please make sure he's on board with whatever your child's identity is and that there's no bigotry issues there, or you could be setting your child up for some kind of trauma in the future.
Sab Jones, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now, we reached out to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba for comment, and we'll give an update when we receive their response next week. All right, we have to pause the news one final time here. The second part of a story about a snowmobile trip across hundreds of kilometers is next. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Cheryl McDonald sent in a photo of her latest quilted creation. Cheryl wanted to honor the children of residential schools who now reside in the spirit world. That's a great creation there, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sharing. We want to see your photos. You can send them by email to share@aptn.ca. Right now, let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We begin on the East Coast, 1 degree and clear in St. John's and 8 in Halifax. -9 in Nain and -1 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 9 degrees in Quebec City and 8 in Montreal. Clear and 10 degrees in Toronto and 0 degrees in North Bay. 3 degrees in Wawa and -6 in Sioux Lookout. Churchill's looking at -12 and 3 degrees and clear in Puckawagan. Snow and -2 in Barons River and snow and -2 in Winnipeg. Clear and -6 in Regina and 0 for North Battleford. Clear and 2 degrees in Buffalo Narrows, and Stony Rapids is looking at 4 and clear. As we make our way west, clear and 6 in Fort Chipewyan and 9 degrees in Grand Prairie. Clear and 7 in Edmonton and clear and 11 in Calgary. 10 degrees in Vancouver and 12 in Bella Coola. 8 degrees in Smithers and 12 in Fort Nelson. Some snow and -3 in Beaver Creek and 5 degrees in Whitehorse. -2 in Norman Wells and 3 degrees in Yellowknife. Snow and -10 in Fort McPherson and -2 in Colville Lake. Cambridge Bay is looking at snow and -6 and -21 in Chesterfield. -25 in Arctic Bay and -17 in Iqaluit. A snowmobile trip across hundreds of kilometers of difficult terrain is teaching a new generation old traditions. It spans hundreds of kilometers from Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories to Old Crow in the Yukon. Here is Carly Jogner with more.
Milena Alexi volunteers to show Alice's grandkids how to set rabbit snares.
Down now, in snow, the bottom end, right there.
The 19-year-old then jumps to harvesting caribou caught around the camp.
I've been hunting and camping before, but not in a big group like this, and it's so great how everybody's working together.
Alexi hopes more will be involved.
I really want to encourage youth to be on this next trip. That's one of my main things. They never know, like me, they could find family they didn't know they had. It'll be good for youth, not just youth, but even the older adults that don't really know this side of the country to be coming and maybe even show their grandkids, like Alice and Ernest. And they made also really good points on why we should be learning to be, like learning these trails. And
your trail on top here, and I came all the way back to Curtin Mountain.
Fort McPherson's James Ross was not on this trip, but he took the inaugural trek as a young Tetlit Gwich'in chief. The trip reminds him of how hard his people worked on the modern land claim. It was born out of the momentum leading up to April 1992 when the claim was signed.
We were always questioned by the government about if we actually used or occupied any of the lands that we were talking about. And the only way to truly show that was to know the land. But that year, as we were getting close to it and we were agreeing on the land blocks, and we had agreements with Old Crow, Dawson, and Mayo First Nations to support us with lands in the Yukon, the elders started talking about how they used to travel in the Yukon by dog teams and through the mountains to Old Crow. And someone mentioned, gee, we should try to do that trip to Old Crow. And Johnny Charlie and William Tea said, well, we can show the way. My brother-in-law, James Firth, who passed on, he actually had pictures from that first trip in 1992. Somebody wrote on it, the youth would like to thank Chief Johnny Charlie and William Tea for showing us the Old Crow Trail. Also for all the guys for showing us how to work together.
He says Charlie was a mentor and key to land claim discussions throughout the 1970s and beyond.
And he was always on the land to ensure the caribou was respected.
Thanks to the land claim, the Gwich'in own land across the Western Arctic in NWT. They have exclusive hunting and fishing rights.
We're people of the caribou. And the interesting thing is our communities in Alaska, the Yukon, and Northwest Territories is primarily the migratory route of the porcupine caribou herd, which is the caribou we use.
The trip is a vivid example of how land is key to the march towards self-governance.
And that's why elders always taught, be respectful of how you hunt caribou and how you treat caribou. Because if you're not respectful, that caribou could choose to go somewhere else and not come to us. So, because the caribou are throughout the mountains, our people have gone where the caribou have gone. So that's why our people are quite nomadic, and that's why the Richardson Mountains, as it's called, is you have our people's use of that whole area, you know, not one particular trail. But in traveling the mountains, our people have to learn what's the safe and proper way to travel through the mountains.
The group arrived back 1 month before the 31st anniversary of the land claim, celebrated as Gwich'in Day on April 22nd. Carly Schogner, APTN National News, Tête Leger, Fort McPherson.
And you can catch part 1 of Carly's story on our website. This week on In Focus, we took a look at reconciliation in sports, specifically APTN's Hockey Night in Canada and Cree broadcast, which also brought the Stanley Cup into our studios. Let's take a look at some clips from our show.
There's Aboriginal names here on the Stanley Cup, and you know there's going to be more yet in the future, and that's the name of the game is the Stanley Cup, and that's where First Nations are heading towards there.
And I believe that Hockey Night in Canada, in Cree, is a catalyst to ultimately that journey of a collective mindset and an awakening within the people.
So it's been really fun, and it's been great in the fact that, you know, the language is being introduced to non-speakers.
There's a partnership between Wasak and the Winnipeg Jets now with the, I don't know if you want to call it, I guess it's Wasak Night is the official title, and then Follow Your Dreams at the Moose, I believe. Yeah. So that's been going on for a few years now. How did that sort of start, and what led to that partnership?
Well, we've been working very closely in partnership with True North for over 20 years now, and that started off many years ago with the Little Moose program. The Little Moose program provided programming during the school day for kids to go skating, but really the main focus was on increased attendance, educational progress, and really a sense of community.
Well, that's all we've got for you tonight on APTN National News. If you happen to miss any of our stories from tonight, no worries. Our website, aptnnews.ca, has you covered. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. Miigwech Kananaskimitin. Have a great evening.